Thank you, Shane. I'm happy to be here with all of you today, if just virtually. But here we are. It's generally accepted that change is required to keep an organization from becoming stagnant, ineffective, or obsolete even. But despite the necessity there, change can strike fear of the unknown, fear of failure, and let's face it, it can be sharply discomforting. So that's a lot for a change leader to confront. So in this hour, we're going to explore renowned expert John Kotter's 8-step model, along with a nod to some other thought leaders as well. So we'll consider the process of change, as well as the critical part that human dynamics play in that. And we'll identify some basic critical steps to leading successful change by observing and distilling decades of research into just a few key concepts. So save the world in under an hour. Let's see if we can do it. I anticipate that you're here today because you recognize the importance of leading change among your duties as a leader. I have here pictured General Charles Q. Brown. He's the U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff and current nominee for Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to replace General Mark Milley, who's retiring. In 2020, General Brown released a strategic approach with the slogan, "Accelerate change or lose." Now, that's pretty bold, and he recognizes that change is central to his commission as a leader. So his approach includes critical defense priorities, as you would expect, but it also includes human dynamics, concepts like collaboration and decision-making at all ranks, and care for service members and their families. And he recognized that change is expansive. You can't simply focus on one component without affecting the other. With his calls to action, General Brown expresses trust in his workforce, invites engagement, and communicates a sense of urgency, along with a lot of other vital components of change that we'll be discussing today. I would like to offer my opinion that public service leaders like General Brown and you share the most noble of duties in orchestrating change in a way that will balance the stability upon which our country and our state depend. That might sound antithetical, but I believe progressive action really toward meaningful change is what actually creates stability. So when we talk about leading change, broadly speaking, most models focus on either a process on one hand or people, and a few include both, but nearly every organization seeks to initiate positive change. And numerous researchers, despite all of the efforts of change, numerous researchers indicate that change initiatives fail somewhere between 60 and 80% of the time. That's not a great record. My hope is to provide you today with a short overview that will heighten your awareness and perhaps prompt a better chance of success than the industry standard presents with a 60 or 80% failure. So you'll find that major change models have some commonalities, and often they can be combined in a mix-match fashion, depending on what makes sense for you. And so today I'm going to primarily walk through John Kotter's 8-step model, and I'll also bring in concepts from a few other scholars where it makes sense. We also have a short course at DHRM that dives a little deeper into the specifics of the human dynamics of change. And today I'm only going to touch lightly on those ideas. So if you're interested in further exploring the human dynamics of change, I have pasted a link to the recording of a previous webinar in this slide, and we will be sending these slides out to all of you who registered. So you will get them, and I've embedded a few links in some of those slides so that you can have access to some of those resources. And you can also get in touch with us for a deeper dive by contacting LOE@utah.gov. All right. So let's start with, what is change? Well, it either happens to you or you make it happen to others. And today I'm primarily talking about changes that that you initiate or at least play a significant role in advancing. And there is a lot worthy of consideration about responding to change as it's thrust upon us, but alas, we only have a short time together. So change management is the process of planning, preparing, supporting, monitoring, and sustaining a shift from one process or a condition to another in our organizations. And changes are happening all the time, and not all changes are big or as impactful as perhaps others. I like this diagram here. The federal government accountability office laid out the concept of a change continuum. So on one end, you have incremental changes. You might call them bite-sized improvements, or kaizen, a Japanese term used in the industrial quality movement. On the other end, you have deep, radical, or what we might call transformational changes. And the closer you get to a radical change, the more scrutiny leadership will need to have about the process. More success planning will have to occur, and more support, the more support individuals will need with the change process. And all of this happens while you as a leader simultaneously seek to provide the stability upon which citizens depend, right? So let's look at a few models that will help us examine how successful change initiatives can occur and what leaders should be looking at. So Kurt Lewin was a German-American psychologist who was a pioneer in organizational behavior. His research and frameworks from the early 20th century have influenced the study of change management and group dynamics. And Lewin captured a relatively simple look at how change works. It has been used in individual psychotherapy as well as with organizations. And in his model, Lewin describes the process as unfreezing, or that's breaking the entrenched pattern, then changing or learning the new way, and finally refreezing or embedding that change. And John Kotter is a more contemporary scholar in the field of leadership, and he's recognized as an expert in change management. He's an alum of MIT, where Lewin gained prominence, and incidentally, he has had much to say about change in the context of our current era, which he asserts is the most disruptive and fastest morphing time frame he has ever experienced or studied. And that's saying a lot. Kotter expanded on Lewin's concept with this 8-step model that he first described in 1995 in a Harvard Business Review article. And then a year later, he released his classic text, A Leading Change, where he began by identifying why organizations fail in their change efforts, trying to address some of that 60 to 80% fail rate, right? The balance of his work then focuses in on the 8 stages of change that address each of these failings. So both Lewin and Kotter's model focus on technical process, or the technical process of change, though they both make a lot of references to the human dynamics serving as a moderating influence. So I want to bring in a third scholar, and that's William Bridges. Bridges was another New Englander who focused his work on the human responses to change. And I like how Bridges observed that it isn't the changes that do you in, it's the transitions. Now, careful wording there. Bridges was speaking about people going through changes, which he distinguished by coining the term transition to describe the human process. So he describes change as more situational and external. So for example, you can move to a new location, have a new reporting structure, new machinery or software. That would be a change. But he describes transition as internal, the psychological process that people go through to come to terms with a new situation. So I believe that you truly have to keep your eye on both the technical process and the human transition in order to successfully navigate change. And notice that in Bridges' model, transition starts with an ending. That's not a misprint. It finishes with a beginning. This, he explained, is because humans initially experience change as the end of something. So once you're wrestling and coping with that ending, then and only then can a beginning emerge. So each phase also stretches from one end to the other, And this acknowledges that each phase is not a separate stage with clear boundaries. They overlap because humans are messy and don't tend to follow nifty sequences that most theoretical models present. A fourth model digs a little deeper into the human condition. Jeff and Linda Russell, who worked extensively in Wisconsin, where Linda worked in state government. Yay! They suggest that change is a tug between chaos and stability and looking backward and forward. And I like this model because they also prescribe helpful actions for a manager or employee to navigate each orientation. And they borrow from Bridges' model, but place it in a 4-quadrant structure that many of us find familiar, right? So I show these human dynamics models because they have relevant pieces that pop up in Kotter's model, and I will mention them every so often. Remember Bridges' warning. It isn't change that will do you in, it's the transition or the human reaction. Now let's return to Kotter's 8 stages. So I'm going to dive into each of the change processes here, each of these 8 steps. We have the 8 steps beginning on the bottom there and going up, and we're going to move through each of those. Creating urgency, building a coalition, creating a vision, communicating that vision, empowering others, creating quick wins, building on the change, and then finally embedding the change. So let's start here with establishing urgency, the first stage. So we kick it off with a need to establish this sense of urgency. Without the sense of urgency, nothing is going to move forward. There's no spark to ignite it. A change requires expending a significant amount of energy, and each person facing change has to find that energy, and it has to be accompanied by a need to depart from the current pattern, and a need to begin that process right away. So when we follow familiar patterns, whether or not they work, we typically fall into some measure of complacency. That's natural because we humans can only focus on so many things at once. And when we get good at a pattern, we can then direct our attention elsewhere. But that leaves us a little bit vulnerable when the pattern no longer is the most effective, or worse yet, it may even undermine our greater mission or purpose. So why do we have this tendency toward complacency? Are we defective? Well, not quite. There are a lot of factors that encourage us to be complacent. For one, when we can't see a crisis or we can't visualize it, it doesn't seem urgent to produce any change. And secondly, if we're surrounded by visual success cues, like things are going well, then don't fix what's not broken. It can be difficult to sense any urgency when that is the situation. When performance measures don't require any stretch or a very little stretch, it's difficult to find motivation to change as well. Many times the organization establishes structures, right, to perform narrow functional tasks efficiently without regard to new emerging conditions. That can get in the way of change, which gets us to focus on the wrong performance indicators. What might be a good indicator today will likely change in the future. Feedback may be lacking from supervisors or even from our customers. And in this case, it's difficult to identify areas for even small improvement. Sometimes efforts to promote harmony can lead to an unwillingness to challenge the status quo, even when those challenges are not really delivered in a contentious manner. And of course, denial. Let's face it, life seems more pleasant without problems, so we have a natural tendency to minimize the need to change or convince ourselves that a problem is not present or that it's not even on the way. And then finally, a happy talk can hush concern or interest in change. It can lead to a false sense of safety with the status quo. So what can we do about this? Well, we can expose weaknesses and threats as we identify them. Sometimes an awareness has to be brought out, and these might already exist in the environment, or in the culture at large. And they could be formally identified through tools like, say, a SWOT analysis, or they can be more informal. Setting goals that require a greater stretch moves the measures and encourages a different approach. When an individual or unit is hyper-focused on a set of tasks, they might not have adequate peripheral vision for where the organization is headed. Finding ways to directly link the organizational goals to the individual employee may help expand the employee's awareness and concern. Seeking feedback from outside the organization not only opens up perspectives from customers and stakeholders, but it also potentially brings in ideas that are not beholden to the organization's history or culture, which might be hindering our progress. And creating a culture that awards critical feedback and challenges the status quo shakes up that complacency as well. So awarding might simply be acknowledging an acknowledgement or expressing gratitude toward individuals who are willing to step forward. And minimizing happy talk does not mean replacing it with negativity or with fear. It simply requires authenticity and honest candor. When things aren't going right, we have to face that and acknowledge that. But it's perhaps not the end of the world, right? In fact, it could include positive encouragement to individuals for addressing the organization's weaknesses or bringing those problems to all of our attention and tackling difficult challenges related to the change effort. Finally, we can focus on future opportunities to create an appetite for possibilities that have been unrealized by the current conditions. And on this avenue, it might be necessary to identify opportunities and match them to individuals who would be attracted to them. And this might be particularly enticing to employees who feel restless or less engaged under the status quo. So you might notice by looking at this list that most of these remedies to raise urgency involve communication. And there are tools and planning templates that can help with this process. Now, moving on, second stage is building a guiding coalition. There's a need to find the right people and put them in the right places. And it is vital to identify key people who can champion the change process and participate in shaping the effort. In doing that, what we need to do is look for people who have position power, have expertise, are credible and well respected, and have a track record of leadership. Now, don't expect each coalition member to fit all of these characteristics. So you'll need some of each. In 1962, there was a social psychologist named Everett Rogers, and he published his diffusion of innovations theory, depicted here. It attempted to explain how over time a new idea gains momentum and spreads or diffuses through an organization or a population. Rogers' theory asserts that change doesn't happen uniformly, and I believe that. It is embraced or resisted differently within an organization, and people are all at different stages when a change is introduced. So researchers took Rogers' model and they quantified the different responses to change and grouped them into 5 categories. And in my opinion, each of these 5 have strengths and weaknesses, and none is categorically good or bad. So on the far left side, we have innovators, and innovators love new ideas. They're adventurous. Sometimes they don't even know how to make an idea happen, but they love the concept. A little to the right of that are early adopters, and they are opinion leaders. They enjoy embracing and leading new ideas, and they're quick to embrace information that convinces them that a change is necessary, and they're on board. They like to see how-to documents, information sheets, and what's the next step that they can help with in implementing. The early majority then embraces change, but they might require some evidence that the change is feasible and logical before they adopt it. They like to see some momentum, convincing justifications, and evidence of some initial victories and progress. The late majority is a bit more skeptical. They're reluctant to adopt the change until it's been, let's say, taken for a test drive. They like to see how risks are mitigated and how the change has been adopted successfully in similar situations before they're ready to climb on board. And finally, we have laggards, and I really don't like that term, but it's what the model uses. Laggards are extremely skeptical. They will question all evidence, all plans, and resist change until they see a safe path forward. But they are also refiners. They are good at identifying risks. They typically embrace change if the pain of resisting the change becomes greater than the pain of making the change. Now, we also do recognize that there will be some who just will not ever get on board, and they end up either resisting the change at the end or ultimately departing from the situation. So there are some important notes of caution. I mentioned William Bridges before. When you're identifying potential coalition members, William Bridges reminds us that change brings about a sense of loss for many people. He identifies this sense of loss as the leading cause of resistance to a change effort. Remember, he identifies the start of a change effort as an ending. That's how people experience it. And the emotions that are associated with losing something can be welcome, or they can be traumatic depending on your perspective and what you're experiencing. So initial resistors may not actually be your enemies. They may be future change leaders once they can find the opportunity in the change and what that opportunity can bring for them. Early adopters may be your obvious pick for your coalition, but recognize that some people still need a little time to process. The other thing is that sometimes early adopters are quickly on board because they haven't realized the ending that the change is going to present to them and some of the things that they will lose. Oftentimes, people who spend time thinking about the change for a while before hopping on board are even better assets than your early adopters because they've faced and thought through a lot of the challenges. So don't be afraid to add to your coalition as the effort proceeds. Another thing to consider in building your coalition is breadth and depth. If your coalition is limited to senior leaders or a one specialized unit, you're going to have difficulty implementing change at the fundamental level. You'll need people from different parts of the organization who have different views, maybe even customers and different perspectives, different touch points that you're getting information from. So you need people who see things from various angles. Another thing to be aware of is your perception of resistance. While it's true that you need people who are supportive of your overall change, you need folks who are able to provide a critical eye and challenge the individual components of how the change process will play out. So it's easy to mistake employees who identify weaknesses and threats as resistors, but you need to differentiate those who are genuinely adversarial from those who are just being constructively critical. Your coalition serves as both a process and a people function. And Kotter reminds us that the common goal must reach the sensibilities of the mind as well as the values of the heart. So we're talking about process and people. And oftentimes the tumult of change gets us hyper-focused on the technical aspects of change, and we forget about the people aspects. In 2021 in Washington, D.C., Joint Base Anacostia Bowling introduced their first all-female command team. Colonel Kat Logan, pictured center, is the commander. On the left is Vice Commander Colonel Erica Raby, and on the right is Chief Master Sergeant Christy Peterson. Their command oversees Arlington National Cemetery, the Air Force Honor Guard, along with coordinating some 30-plus joint mission units. So these leaders know something about change and particularly dealing with resistance. Upon accepting command, Colonel Logan, already known for her sensible leadership and high performance, shared her appeal to the heart. She explained, I want every day to have a positive impact on people. Every day I want to live the slogan, do it with heart. Now, in addition to accomplishing a mission of technical tasks, at this base, they're concerned with the values that they believe will enable them to respond effectively to the changes that come at them. HEART is an acronym that stands for a vision of values: honesty, effort, attitude, respect, and teamwork. If you're doing this, Colonel Logan explains, it drives a culture and an environment that allows people to thrive. I care for my team. I trust them. I have their backs, she says. Kotter talks about a common goal being a synthesis of the mind and the heart. Technical task is amplified and solidified by an intrinsically motivated mission found in the heart. This command gets up each morning with a common goal that forms the foundation of their change vision. And here we are at third stage in Kotter's model, developing a vision and strategy. Now, Kotter asserts that a good vision helps overcome the natural reluctance to do what may be painfully necessary by being hopeful and seeing light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So a good vision acknowledges that sacrifices will be necessary, but makes it clear that these sacrifices will yield benefits and personal satisfaction that far exceed what is available without the change. So admittedly, it is difficult to strike a balance between optimism and pragmatism, but a vision needs to be inspiring and at the same time realistically achievable. An organization change vision is advanced by leadership, but it's really informed by keen insight into what drives and appeals to members of the organization. So leaders also establish overarching strategies. The managers, or in smaller units, individual contributors advance the plans, right? Plans include specific steps, timetables, budgets, tactical actions that implement the strategies. Using some available tools to carry out these activities also has another benefit. When you're involved in a change effort, it demonstrates to your skeptics that you have been conscientious in your ambition. So what's in a change vision anyway? All right, let's take a look at this. A change vision should be imaginable. It should convey a picture of what the future looks like. That future obviously needs to be desirable. Imagine if we made something very imaginable, but it was a horrifying picture. It needs to be desirable. It needs to appeal to the long-term interests of employees, customers, and stakeholders. It needs to be feasible. It needs to be comprised of realistic and attainable goals. It needs to be focused. If it's too scattered, we run the risk of being all over the place and not sure what the vision truly is. So focused is clear enough to provide guidance when making decisions, but not so fixed as to not allow some flexibility, which is our next value there. It needs to allow for individual initiative and alternate responses when the conditions change. As you embark on a change initiative, you will find that oftentimes the conditions change as you're going about making the very change itself. The last part there is communicable. It has to be easy to communicate. You should be able to explain it in 5 minutes or less. And sometimes this is best done with visuals, with pictures and diagrams, something that's easy to capture and easy for folks to wrap their heads around. I got a couple of notes here as well. There's a role for head and heart. That is both the analytical thinking and ambitious dreaming, and we need both. And we shouldn't be overpowered with one or the other. We need them. We need them both, and we need them to merge in any change effort. And it gets messy, right? A vision creation is often a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it's rare to create a vision in a single meeting. So have some patience there with that. So up to now, the first 3 stages of Kotter's model fit neatly into what Lewin would call unfreezing. That's laying the groundwork. And in Kotter's 4th stage, we move into the change itself. Back to Kotter's model there, you see we're going to deal with those 3 in the middle. So it's not enough to have a vision, it has to be communicated. Communicating a change is not about selling. You sell a finished product. A change vision, on the other hand, is an invitation to participate in creating something exciting. So the product isn't complete. Can people you share the vision, can people, the people that you share the vision with, can they see themselves in this effort? What part can they play? And what benefit will it bring them? That's part of communicating that vision. So years ago, a famous leadership thinker, Tom Peters, suggested that the term enrollment was a more accurate or better term than buy-in. And I really like this concept. Enrollment is an authentic, powerful way of communicating that grabs the employee's attention, stimulates interest, and invites others to embrace, support, and believe in a position or an idea or a philosophy. So the enrolled participants say, I want to become part of the cause. I want to take ownership of the cause. It's not manipulative and it's not autocratic. It's a mutual win-win. It is participative. It invites others to generate good. It encourages discretionary effort, and it connects the mind with the heart. And it makes room for self-expression, individual talent, values, and styles. Some things to keep in mind when you communicate your vision: use simple language. Eliminate the technical jargon that we're sometimes accused of. Sometimes we get into techno-babble and complicated explanations. When communicating a vision, it needs to be simple. Paint a picture. Use a metaphor, an analogy, an example, or a literal picture. Use multiple formats. Share it in big meetings, share it in small meetings, memos, agendas, personal conversations. Repeat it. Once isn't enough, right? Lead by example. Behaviors and actions that seem to run counter to the vision will speak louder than the idea itself. Clarify. It's necessary to explain why certain actions are consistent with the vision. And sometimes some things might be a little bit off, and we have to explain where that's at. And two-way communication. This is where we create dialogue around the vision and enables it to gain momentum. Perhaps other people have a perspective to share about that vision and what it means to them. Now back to William Bridges, he shares a few cautions to remember when we consider how people receive communication. The first one is that it's not a secret. If you think that concealing the news or the true details until the last minute will avoid heartache, ask yourself if you're willing to trade heartache for bitterness and distrust. Any information that's not strictly confidential should really be shared. It is also likely that the grapevine is already spreading the news. So if you have an effective secrecy pact, or you think you do, even this can lead employees to distrust future communication as incomplete or not trustworthy. Next, repetition. There it is again, right? Repetition. Just because it was announced once doesn't make it stick. Share the change details numerous times using various communication modes. It doesn't trickle down. You can rely on the chain of command, but you really can't rely on that to relay the change initiatives accurately all the way down. Supervisors are going through the transition themselves and are therefore likely to experience confusion and anxiety themselves. So some supervisors may delay communication And you have to inform management teams and supervisors, but the communication really should be universal, if at all possible. Silence is deadly. The idea that you don't say anything until you know the details can be really dangerous. People fill in information where none is provided. So don't be afraid to say that you don't know. Let them know what the appropriate timeline is and report back, even if the decision is delayed or you still don't know. The fifth stage is where we get into action. It compels action. It's time to get the action going. And in this stage, the change coalition has to go to work, removing as many barriers to achieving the vision as possible. When we talk about barriers, you'll find that the biggest obstacles are these four pressures coming in on our change initiative, right? You have structures that might be hindrances, perhaps skill deficits or knowledge deficits. Systems can get in the way, and supervisor communication can also get in the way. And now these barriers don't always present themselves at the beginning of the change effort. They often emerge or become apparent at different stages in the change effort, and it might require you to take a step back to clarify and take some actions um, to nullify or remove those obstacles. Kotter identified his sixth stage as generating a short-term or quick wins. So what does this mean? Well, to a great extent, you're celebrating successes, and it's fun to celebrate success, and because you can see triumphs. Change initiatives can take an enormous amount of energy, and they can extend over a long time, months or years. And when folks see quick wins, it can boost their confidence and commitment to continuing their pursuit of the new vision. It's often been said, nothing breeds success like success. So it snowballs. In addition to building momentum and encouraging those engaged in the change effort, short-term successes can ignite the interest of those who've been kind of sitting on the fence. It might also discredit the most ardent skeptics and resistors. And intermediate successes might also highlight some areas that you need to fine-tune or rethink a little bit. So in order to do this, it might be necessary to break change initiatives down into phases and identify tangible benefits at each of those phases. So quick wins should be visible, unambiguous, and clearly related to the change effort. If they're just celebration that are off here and people don't see how that's connected to the change effort, you're not going to get a big win off of that. They should be purposeful and organized. And of course, I have to throw my Bob Ross in here. There might be some accidental discoveries along the way too, right? The happy accidents. All right, so I've identified 6 steps in Kotter's 8-step change model, and the last 2 steps are concerned with what Lewin would call refreezing or sustaining the change. Here's Kotter's model. Again, we're at these top 2. So real change takes time, and that's mostly due to the human process of adjusting or adapting psychologically to that change. So part of that reason is because it requires new habits, new processes, even new technologies and structures, and of course, consistent application. The technical change itself might not take terribly long, but the human transition can take much longer to realize. So Kotter refers to the 7th stage as a consolidation of gains. And while celebrating short-term successes is important, they can actually stall the change effort if the urgency is lost that we talked about at the very beginning. So that can also lead participants to get the idea that the change effort has stalled or reached its terminus. We're just celebrating right here and this is good enough. But Kotter reminds us that resistance is always waiting to reassert itself. So the perennial slogan, remember, of the skeptic, I have been guilty of this phrase myself, this too shall pass. Many a cautious employee has observed that a high percentage of change efforts fail or fall very short of expectations. And why? Well, we've been talking a lot about factors that contribute to this phenomenon, but perhaps none is more salient than the end game. How many change efforts are characterized by a leader who then partway through quickly exits before the change is truly realized or able to be sustained? Or how many initiatives have you observed where coalitions quickly fall apart or dissolve when the next exciting thing is introduced? How often do attractive short-term wins distract you and others from long-term interest and sustained strategy? Now, I like to build things out of wood, but I admittedly dislike staining or painting. So many of the items I've crafted look incomplete years after I finish them. I have a vast collection of either unfinished items or finely crafted items with a bad paint job. This is the nature of change. It's easy to lose interest or momentum at any stage, but especially once the initial pain of implementation is passed. At this stage, the risk is very high that people will either revert to old ways of doing things, or they'll find new shortcuts that ultimately fall short of what's desired. So this is the point in a change effort that Bridges calls the beginning. Interesting that the beginning should come after the end, but it really makes sense when you consider that we humans initially experience change as an end. Sometimes it's welcome, other times not. At any rate, beginnings are both scary and exciting. They're scary because they solidify new commitments with a sense of finality, and it challenges us to let go of something that may have been comfortable, regardless of whether it was appropriate or effective. Beginnings also confirm that the ending of the old way is really happening, and we may have liked that old way. Beginnings are not exits or escapes, they're immersive commitments. So beginnings can also trigger some old anxieties, memories of past failures, incidents, or a traumatic organizational events, and they introduce a new uh, or a new collection of unknowns, right? For a few, the tumult and chaos that was going on in the middle of a change effort was a comfortable place. And some individuals thrive in an environment of ambiguity and chaos. It's exciting. They have difficulty adjusting to the more fixed patterns or processes that others of us find more comforting. So there might still be others who enjoy the confusion because it offers a break from routine performance pressure. Whenever you're engaged in especially in a big, massive change, you're going to lose some of that uh, performance effectiveness, right? Until the pattern is once again fixed. But beginnings offer a little something for everyone. For those who long for a little variety and a little chaos, beginning offers a new opportunity to identify new threats. Okay, we got over that. Now there are some new opportunities, some new weaknesses that we can focus on. And oftentimes going through a change initiative itself exposes some new weaknesses that were completely unaware of before. Kotter cautions that every organization is made up of interdependent parts. So a change in one part surely affects uh, another. And this can create a lot of inertia or resistance to embedding the change in the very last 8th stage that Kotter proposes. So there's still a lot of work to do here in stage 7. It's a good opportunity to really suss out interdependencies that should not exist relative to the change efforts. Remember, we talked earlier about sometimes these, when we think a little more narrowly, this change is just happening here, but we're unaware of how that might impact other parts of our system that we're touching. So what unnecessary impacts is the change effort having on groups or areas that shouldn't be impacted? And what can be done to reduce or eliminate these adverse impacts? So during this stage, it might also be wise to revisit our stages 4 through 6. That's communicating the vision, empowering others, and creating more short-term wins. This is especially true for changes that impact other areas that weren't originally anticipated. So your coalition members who thrive a little better in chaos might find a new spark in engaging more change opportunities here. And for those who long for more stability and consistency, perhaps more order, there's the 8th and final stage, and that is embedding the change. So the question is, have we arrived, or are we just somewhere along a continuum of change? Those who long for order and consistency, this stage of embedding the change, or anchoring, as Kotter calls it, offers an opportunity to stabilize the structures and processes that we've been practicing in the change initiative. So this stage can signal continuity and reduce ambiguity. It comes as a great relief from the initial pains that the change effort may have induced. This can be an affirmative and stabilizing feeling, and individuals who have wrestled with the change are often ready and eager to activate their commitment in a more stable environment. So for some, they've been waiting for this so they can feel more comfortable adapting. Beginnings may serve to confirm new identities, new roles that have been uncertain and vague or ambiguous for some time. In some cases, beginnings offer a severance from past weaknesses, past failings, or limiting emotions or systems. Employees who thrive with more stability may have the most skill and insight to lend to this stage of change. So here we are, Kotter's 8-step model. And as you can see here, it's depicted as linear, because that's how we make sense of change and address each of the areas that threaten the ability of an organization, the adaptability of an organization. But overall, we have to recognize that change is dynamic. It doesn't necessarily follow a nice ladder or a linear pattern that are found in these depicted models. It requires attentiveness, constant adjustment, maybe a few steps back, repeats, it demands that we address both technical process and human reaction. And we might have to revisit a few of those stages multiple times. So ultimately, I hope this helps you as a change leader make sense of this vital part of leadership. I hope it helps you examine past change efforts and prepare for the new ones that will surely come. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. We've had just short of an hour to become masters of change. Obviously, that's inadequate, as you know. So the challenge is to learn more and practice, then share with your colleagues and gain more insights from those around you. I wish you great fortune. If you would like to access some specific tools for facilitating change, or even have a pair of outside eyes work with you or your change coalition, you may contact DHRM's Leadership and Organizational Development team. The contact information I have included in these slides. It's going to be here at the end and also at the very beginning. You're welcome to contact us there with that. We have another off-the-shelf webinar coming to you next month. We're going to, my colleague Rick Murdoch is going to enter the world of artificial intelligence with the title, "For Your Information in Search of a Magic 8-Ball." And Rick is going to talk about AI as a decision-making tool for leaders. He's going to talk about sifting through misinformation and missed information, and also avoiding the chaos of disinformation. Again, you'll be sent a link with these slides, but I've also included a registration link in there for you in that slide. Also, those of you who have been participating in our Apple workshops, this is advanced performance planning and leading engagement. That's the acronym for Apple, and we're out doing these workshops. There are 4-hour workshops around the state, mostly on the Wasatch Front, but we have a few other areas also. And the topic changes quarterly. We will be beginning a new one, developing employees, in October, and that runs through December. The bulk of our courses there will be October and November, and we're really going to be talking about how to develop your high potential employees and what that means. As always, thank you for being here with us today, and I appreciate your attendance, and wish you the best of fortune and in your future change efforts.